Let me tell you about the specific kind of heartbreak that nobody warns you about. Not the kind that comes with a fight or a betrayal or a door slamming. The kind that arrives quietly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, when the person you love most in the world puts his arm around someone else and you realize with complete and terrible clarity that he has never once thought of putting it around you. Not because you were not enough. Not because something went wrong. Simply because the heart goes where it goes and has went somewhere that was not you and it was never going to be you, and somewhere underneath all the hoping you had known that for a long time. My name is Clara. I have been in love with my best friend since I was 14 years old. I am 26 now. This is the story of the 12 years in between and what I found on the other side of them. I want to tell it honestly, without making him a villain, without making myself a martyr, without the comfortable narrative of someone who was wronged. Because I was not wronged. I was just in love with the wrong person. And the difference between those two things is something it took me a very long time to understand. Ethan was never cruel to me. He was never careless. He was, for 12 years, one of the best people I have ever known. And that is exactly what made it so hard. You cannot be angry at someone for not loving you the way you wanted. You can only carry it quietly until you learn to put it down. We met when we were 7. His family moved into the house at the end of my street in September, and by October we were inseparable in the specific way of children who find each other before they have learned to be careful about it. He was the kind of kid who collected things, rocks and bottle caps and pieces of string that he thought might be useful someday. I was the kind of kid who made up stories about everything, who turned every walk home into a narrative, every puddle into a decision point in a larger adventure. We complemented each other in that easy early way. He was the ground and I was the sky, and together we made a world that fit us both. We went through everything together. The first day of middle school. The year his parents separated. The year my grandmother died and I could not explain to anyone why it felt like losing a piece of my own architecture. He sat with me on the back porch the night of her funeral and did not say anything useful but stayed until I stopped shaking, and I understood even then that this was a person who knew how to be present. I think I started loving him the way you love a person rather than just a friend somewhere around the age of 14. There was no specific moment. Just a gradual brightening of everything he was. The way I noticed his laugh before I noticed other people's laughs. The way I angled myself toward him in rooms without deciding to. The way his opinion became the one I wanted first. Small things. The kind that add up before you have a name for them. The thing about loving your best friend is that you become very skilled at a kind of double vision. You see them clearly, all of them, the ordinary and the extraordinary, the habits that would bother you in anyone else and the qualities that make your chest do something complicated. And you also see every interaction through the lens of what you hope it means. A hand on your shoulder. A look held a beat longer than necessary. The way he texts you first when something happens, good or bad. You take these ordinary things and you turn them over in your hands like stones that might be something more if the light hits them right. I did this for years. I was careful with the evidence, the way you are careful with something fragile. Because I understood that the interpretation I wanted might not be the correct one. But hope is a persistent thing. It keeps finding reasons to continue. I told myself, we are close in a way that is different from his other friendships. I told myself, he notices things about me that other people miss. I told myself, the right moment just has not come yet. I want to be fair to the girl I was when I was telling myself these things. She was not delusional. She was not constructing something from nothing. There was real closeness there, real warmth, real care. She just did not understand yet that closeness and warmth and care are not the same thing as love. Not the kind she was hoping for. Ethan met Lily in our second year of university. I remember the night he told me about her. We were sitting in the kitchen of the apartment he shared with 2 other people, late, the way we often ended up somewhere late because neither of us was in a hurry to end the conversation. He said, I met someone today. And his voice was different. Not dramatically. Just slightly more careful, the way a voice gets when it is carrying something it does not want to spill. I looked at him. He was looking at his coffee cup. He said her name and I noted the way he said it, quietly, like a word he was still deciding whether to trust out loud. I said, "Tell me about her." And he did. She was in his literature seminar. She had argued a point about a novel they were reading with the particular fearlessness of someone who was not performing confidence but simply had it. She had disagreed with the professor and been right and not apologized for either. He laughed when he described it. He said, she was not even being dramatic. She just said the thing. I watched his face while he talked. I had studied that face for years. I knew the difference between Ethan being animated about an idea and Ethan being animated about a person. This was the second thing. This was new. I said, "She sounds interesting." He said, "I think she is." I went home that night and I sat in the dark for a while before I turned the lights on. Not crying. Just sitting. Acknowledging something I had been refusing to acknowledge. They started spending time together slowly at first and then constantly in the way that new relationships build their own gravity. I heard about her in increments. Small details that accumulated into a person. She liked obscure films and argued about them passionately. She was studying literature but wanted to work in publishing. She had a sister she was close to and a complicated relationship with her father that she talked about with clear eyes and no drama. She made Ethan laugh in a specific way I had not heard from him before, lighter than usual, more surprised. I want to be very honest about what I felt during this time because honesty is the only thing that makes this story worth telling. I did not hate her. I tried to, briefly, in the way you reach for an emotion because it would be easier than the one you actually have. But she was genuinely good. Kind, interesting, the kind of person who remembers what you said last time you talked. When I eventually met her, she shook my hand and said, "I have heard so much about you. He talks about you like you are one of the best people he knows." She meant it warmly. I received it like a door closing. Not her fault. Not his fault. Just the specific mathematics of a situation where the person you love describes you to someone else as a best friend and you understand, in the warmth of those words, exactly where you stand. There was a day in early spring of that year that I think about sometimes still. We had all ended up at a birthday gathering for a mutual friend, a large apartment, more people than space, the specific warmth of too many bodies and too much conversation. At some point I was standing near the window with a drink I was not really drinking and I saw them across the room. Ethan had his arm around her shoulders. Not dramatically, not for show. Just the easy instinctive arm of someone who has found their person and reaches for them without thinking. She was talking to someone else and he was half listening and half just present beside her, relaxed in a way I recognized as rare for him because Ethan was never quite fully relaxed in crowds. But he was relaxed now. I watched them and I thought about the lyric from a song I had been listening to too much that month. Watch as he stands with her, holding her hand. Put his arm round her shoulder, now I'm getting colder. But how could I hate her? She's such an angel. I thought, she is. She really is. And he is happy. And I love him. And loving someone means wanting them to be happy even when that happiness has nothing to do with you. I understood this in theory. I had understood it in theory for a while. Standing at that window, I understood it in the specific painful way of something that has moved from the mind to the body. I went home early that night. I told myself I was tired, which was also true. I sat on my bedroom floor, which is something I do when I need to think and cannot do it while sitting in a chair like a reasonable person. I had a conversation with myself that I had been avoiding for a long time. It went something like this. He does not love you that way. Not because you are not worth loving that way. But because the heart goes where it goes and has gone somewhere else and it was probably always going somewhere else and the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop waiting for something that is not coming. I said this to myself as plainly as I could. The way I would have said it to a friend who was describing the same situation. I thought about the years I had spent turning small moments over in my hands looking for meaning that was not there. I thought about all the times I had been almost ready to say something and had stopped myself because the timing was not right, or I needed to be more sure, or I was afraid of losing the friendship. I understood now that the hesitation had not been caution. It had been knowledge. Some part of me had always known. Had always understood that the answer was already written and I was just not ready to read it yet. I cried that night. Not dramatically. Just for a while, quietly, the way you cry when you are grieving something that was never yours but felt like it should have been. Moving on is not a single event. I want to be clear about this because I think the way we talk about it suggests it happens once, that there is a moment of decision and then the feeling fades and you are free. It does not work that way. It worked for me in layers, the way old paint comes off a wall. Some layers came away easily. Others required more effort and still left residue. The first thing I did was stop trying to read meaning into the ordinary things he did. This sounds small. It was one of the harder things. I had been doing it for so long it had become reflexive. He texted me first and I would note it. He remembered something I mentioned weeks ago and I would note it. I had to learn to let these things be what they were, the behavior of a good friend who cared about me. Nothing more and nothing less. This required me to build a different relationship with hope. Not to abandon it, but to redirect it. To understand that hoping for his love specifically was keeping me from being available for something else. The second thing I did was tell someone. Not him. A friend from my course, someone outside of the Ethan world, someone who would not carry the information back to anyone I needed to protect. I told her the whole thing over coffee one afternoon and she listened without drama and said, "That sounds like it has been really lonely." It had been. Nobody had named that part before. Ethan and I stayed close through all of this. That was important to me and also complicated. I did not want to lose the friendship. It was real and it was good and it had been part of my life for so long that losing it would have been its own grief on top of the one I was already carrying. But I also understood that I could not continue exactly as before. Some things needed to shift. I stopped manufacturing reasons to spend time with him one-on-one. Not because I could not handle it, but because I had been using that time to maintain a proximity that was not healthy for me. I started saying no to some things and yes to others. I built up other friendships that I had been keeping at a slight distance because Ethan had taken up so much of the available emotional space. I let people in that I had been keeping at arm's length without fully realizing I was doing it. Lily and Ethan became more serious over that year and I watched it happen with the specific quiet of someone who has decided to let a thing be what it is. I was kind to her because she deserved kindness. I was genuinely present at the dinners we all shared because he deserved a friend who was present. There were still hard evenings. There were still moments when something landed differently than I expected. But they were getting smaller. Less frequent. The way a tide goes out. I want to talk about something that I think gets left out of stories like this one, which is the way moving on changes your relationship with yourself. Because the love I had for Ethan was real, and it had been a significant part of how I understood myself for 12 years. I was the person who loved him. That was not the whole of me, but it was a thread woven through everything. When I started pulling it out carefully, I had to figure out what was underneath. Who was I when I was not orienting myself towards someone else's life? What did I want when the wanting was allowed to be purely mine? This was unfamiliar and sometimes uncomfortable and occasionally wonderful. I started doing things I had been postponing without clear reason. I took a writing class I had been interested in for 2 years. I said yes to a trip with friends that I would previously have declined in case it conflicted with time with Ethan. I started running in the mornings, which I had wanted to do for a long time and kept not doing, and I discovered that I liked it not for any reason of health or discipline but because the first 30 minutes of the day were mine entirely, no narrative, no hope, no disappointment, just movement and air and the city waking up around me. I was rebuilding something. Not from nothing. From the material that had always been there but which I had not been paying enough attention to. I met Sam at the writing class. This is the part of the story that I am most careful about telling because I do not want it to sound like a replacement. He was not a replacement. He was a separate thing entirely, which is exactly why it worked. He was in the class because he worked in graphic design and wanted to write better copy and had been told by 3 different colleagues to take a course. He arrived 5 minutes late to the first session, sat in the only remaining chair which was next to mine, and spent the first 20 minutes looking faintly panicked about the exercise we had been given, which was to write 200 words about a specific sensory memory. I watched him stare at the page. After a while I said quietly, "Just pick one thing. Any one thing. One detail." He looked at me. Then he looked back at the page and wrote something. At the break he showed it to me. It was about the smell of a hardware store his grandfather had owned. 4 sentences. They were good. I told him so honestly, and he looked at the page and said, "Huh." Like it had surprised him. I did not think about it again until the following week when he came back and sat next to me again. Not the nearest chair. My specific chair. I noted it the way I noted things. This time I did not turn it over in my hands looking for meaning. I just let it be what it was and waited to see what it became. What it became was slow and unforced and entirely unlike anything I had experienced before. Sam did not consume the room the way first love does. He did not arrive with that specific weight of significance that had made everything with Ethan feel so charged and so fragile. He was simply there. Consistently. Present in a way that built something gradual and solid rather than something immediate and precarious. He remembered things I said. He asked questions that suggested he had been thinking about the conversation after it ended. He was honest in a way that required no performance, the kind of honesty that belongs to someone who has decided that being known accurately is more important than being liked strategically. I found this disarming. I had spent so long guarding my own honesty, managing what I showed, being careful with the parts of myself that were vulnerable, that encountering someone who was simply not doing that made me aware of how much energy I had been spending on the management. He made me want to put things down. This was new. Not alarming but new. I was careful with it. I had learned from the years before that hope held too tightly becomes a kind of pressure that distorts what it touches. So I let this be light. I let it be just what it was in each moment, and I did not ask it to be more than that until it showed me it wanted to be. There was an evening about 2 months into knowing Sam when I told him about Ethan. Not everything. The shape of it. I said, I was in love with my best friend for a long time and it was not returned, and I am in the process of figuring out who I am on the other side of that. He listened in the complete way that he had, the quality of attention that I had come to recognize as simply how he was, not performance, just presence. When I finished he said, "That sounds like it took a lot out of you." I said, "It did." He said, "Are you okay now?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "I am getting there. I think getting there is its own thing." He nodded. He said, "I think that is the most honest answer anyone ever gives to that question." We sat for a while. Then he said, "For what it is worth, I think the version of you that came out the other side of that sounds like someone worth knowing." I said, "How would you know?" He said, "I have been sitting next to you in this class for 2 months. I think I have some data." I looked at him. He was not being smooth. He was just saying the thing. I thought about how long I had waited for someone to simply say the thing. I thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Not the electricity and the hope and the careful management of proximity. This. Just someone sitting next to you and saying the thing. Ethan proposed to Lily in November of that year. He called me to tell me before he told anyone else, which was characteristic of him and which I received as the love it was, the correct kind, the friendship kind, the kind that had always been real even when I had been hoping for something else. He said, "I wanted you to know first." His voice was the way voices get when something has settled completely into the right place. I said, "Ethan, I am so happy for you." And I was. Not without anything underneath it. But the underneath was smaller than it would have been a year before. The something underneath was the last small residue of a long letting go, and even it had a quality now that was closer to tenderness than to grief. I said, "She is the right person for you." He said, "I know." He said, "You are going to be at the wedding." I said, "Obviously." He said, "I mean in the front. Not just there. In the front." I laughed. I said, "Where else would I be?" After we hung up, I sat for a while. I thought about the 14-year-old girl who had started loving him without knowing she was doing it. I thought about 12 years of small hopes and careful distances and turning ordinary moments over in her hands. I thought, she deserved to be here. In this apartment, in this life, on her way somewhere that fits. I said out loud to nobody, "We are going to be okay." And I meant it for both of us. Sam and I had our first real conversation about what we were on a Wednesday in December. It was not a dramatic conversation. We were walking after the last session of the writing class, the cold settling around us in that specific December way, and he said, "I would like to keep seeing you. Not just in class. I want to be clear that I mean something more than that." I looked at him. He was looking straight ahead, which I had noticed he did when he was saying something that cost him a little. I said, "I would like that too." He looked at me then. He said, "Yeah?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." We kept walking. It was, objectively, one of the least dramatic romantic moments in the history of romantic moments. No rain, no music, no speech. Just two people walking in December cold agreeing to something honest. I thought about all the moments I had manufactured significance around, all the looks and the hands and the texts I had turned into evidence of something larger than they were. I thought about how much space I had given hope that was pointed in the wrong direction. And I thought, this is what it feels like when it is real. Not bigger. Not louder. Just clearer. This story is made by Withered Petal Story. Like walking in the dark for a long time and then the light coming on, not dramatically but simply, and finding that the room you are in is exactly the right size. Ethan and Lily's wedding was in April. I was in the front as promised, third seat from the aisle, and I watched him stand at the end of that aisle waiting for her with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not nerves exactly. More like arrival. Like someone who has been traveling for a long time and has just seen the place they were heading. When she came in, he did not look at anyone else. He just looked at her. I watched this and I felt something I had not expected to feel, which was gratitude. Not a performed gratitude, not the gratitude of someone who has made peace with something through effort. A genuine clean gratitude. For the 12 years of friendship that had been real. For the way loving him had taught me things about myself that I carried into everything after. For the fact that he was happy in the specific complete way that the right love makes you happy. And for the fact that I was sitting in a room full of people who loved him and I was one of them, and that was enough, and it had always been enough, and I had just needed a long time to understand that being someone's person is different from being someone's best person. He caught my eye once during the reception and he smiled at me across the room, the specific smile that had been ours for 19 years. I smiled back. We were okay. We had always been okay. We had just each needed to find our own way there. Sam came to the wedding with me. Not as a statement, not with any weight attached to it. Just because Ethan had said bring someone if you want to, and Sam had said I would like to come if that is okay with you, and I had said yes, and that was the entirety of the decision. He was good at weddings in the way of someone who is comfortable in rooms full of people without needing to perform anything. He talked to Ethan's uncle about architecture for 20 minutes and came back looking genuinely interested. He danced badly and knew it and did not care at all. He found me twice during the evening specifically, not because he was checking on me but because he had thought of something he wanted to say to me and had come to say it. Once it was about something funny that had happened at the dessert table. Once it was just to put his hand briefly at the small of my back and ask if I was having a good time. I was. I was having a good time at my childhood best friend's wedding, the boy I had loved since I was 14. And it was genuinely a good time without asterisks or management or anything underneath it. I thought, this is what the other side looks like. Not the absence of everything that came before. The presence of something that makes the before make sense. There is something I want to say about the years I spent loving Ethan the wrong way, which is that I do not think they were wasted. I know that is not the obvious takeaway from a story about unrequited love. The obvious takeaway is about the time lost, the hope misdirected, the years spent waiting for something that was not going to happen. And those things are true. But the other true thing is that loving someone carefully for a long time teaches you things. It taught me what real attention looks like, because I paid real attention to him. It taught me the difference between proximity and intimacy, because we had one without the other for years. It taught me that love without reciprocity is its own complete experience. Not a lesser version of the real thing, but its own thing with its own weight and its own specific pain that is also, if you carry it right, its own specific education. I came into whatever I have with Sam knowing things I would not have known otherwise. What I actually want. What I was willing to settle for before and am not willing to settle for now. What it feels like to be truly seen rather than hopefully interpreted. These are not small things. These are the architecture of a life. I would not trade the 12 years. I would trade the hope I attached to them. But the love itself, the real part, I carry that as something that made me more rather than less. Ethan and I talked once, about a year after the wedding, about the old days. We were having coffee at the place near his apartment, just us, the way we still did occasionally because the friendship was real and had survived everything else. He said something that surprised me. He said, "I think about sometimes how you were always just there. Through everything. I never had to explain myself to you." I said, "No." He said, "I hope you know how much that has meant." I said, "I do." He looked at me for a moment. He said, "I think I took it for granted sometimes. Not on purpose. But I think I did." I looked at him. He was being honest in the particular careful way he was sometimes honest when something mattered. I said, "You were a good friend to me too." He said, "I want to make sure that is true." I said, "Ethan. It is true." He nodded. We moved on to other topics. He told me about a project he was working on. I told him about something Sam had said that week that had made me laugh for an unreasonable amount of time. He listened and smiled and said, "You seem really happy." I said, "I am." He said, "I am glad." And that was everything. That was the whole complete thing. Two people who had been woven together since childhood sitting in a coffee shop being genuinely glad for each other's happiness. I thought, this is what it was supposed to become. Not what I had hoped for at 14. This. I am 28 now. Sam and I have been together for 2 years. We live in an apartment with too many books and one plant that we disagree about how to water and a kitchen where we have learned to cook around each other without collision. He still says the thing plainly when he has something to say, and I still find this disarming even though I know it is coming. He has read most of what I have written. He reads it the way he listened in that writing class, completely, and tells me what is working and what is not, and I trust his assessment because he has no investment in being gentle at the expense of being useful. I love him in a way that does not require management. That is the specific thing I would say if someone asked me to describe it. I do not have to manage this. I do not have to interpret it or hope it into a shape it has not taken yet. It is already the shape it is and the shape fits, and I did not know until I had this what I had been carrying before. Ethan and Lily are expecting their first child in June. I am going to be there. I will hold that baby and mean it completely. There will be no underneath. I want to say something to anyone who is currently where I was. Carrying something quiet and heavy and pointed in a direction it cannot go. You are not wrong to love who you love. The heart does not take applications. But you are allowed to put it down eventually. You are allowed to redirect the care toward yourself. Toward someone who can receive it, toward a life that is entirely yours. The putting down is not betrayal. It is the most loving thing you can do for both of you. This story is made by Withered Petal Story. Subscribe for new stories every week. Leave a comment. I read every single one.